Thank you all for being here. It's so good to see you. I want to learn a little bit more about all of you in a moment. This topic of warming up is one that's very near and dear to my heart. I love being a musician. I love playing the trumpet. I would say for many years, maybe decades, I kind of thought of myself as a player who was capable of making some great music on my good days. But I struggled for many years with sort of the chronic fatigue issue when you practice and you practice and you practice, and then it actually starts making things worse because you've overplayed and you're starting to press the mouthpiece. I've struggled with that. I struggled with inconsistency, where some days things sounded amazing, and then other days it was like, wow, I don't even feel like the same player. And so these were very, very frustrating problems that took me many, many years to work through. And really the warm-up ended up being the key to both of those issues of chronic fatigue and inconsistency. So hopefully some of the things I've learned about my own warm-up may be of help to some of you, whether it's in your own playing, or if you're a teacher, maybe your group warm-up or ensemble warm-up with your students. I should say that the things that I sort of gradually discovered worked for me in my warm-up to help me be a more consistent player and struggle less with fatigue. All of these things ended up being sort of fortified by my yoga practice. Actually, in my 40s, I became very interested in yoga and started practicing it. And I noticed that in yoga, there's a very almost ritualistic procedure of starting very slow and very gradually and giving the body time to breathe and to sort of warm up before you do the more rigorous poses. And it kind of reinforced a lot of what I had discovered in my own playing. I think it's fair to say I grew up in sort of a no pain, no gain sort of family where you were just expected to work really hard, and the harder you work, the better the results. And I think what I learned gradually about warming up on the trumpet and also through yoga is that sometimes it's actually better to pay attention to the signals your body is sending you. And if your lips aren't responding exactly the same way one day that they did the previous day, well, then you should pay attention to that and vary your warm up and do what you need in the moment every day, which may not be exactly the same from day to day. So what do you think is the purpose of a warm up? Just in a few words, it doesn't have to be comprehensive or beautifully stated. To get ready, to get in tune, to get prepared to play. I saw injury prevention, performance injury prevention, physical and mental. Oh, it's hard to keep up with them. Like physically warming the temperature of your instrument. Good point. To improve, to get better. Yeah, I think those are all part of what the warm up is about. Prepare the body to perform. Warm up the muscles. Very good. So I think initially, when I was a younger player, less experienced player, I really thought of the warm-up as something physical. I wanted to get the lips vibrating, get the air full and vigorous and free blowing, and get the response so that when I go to play, the tone just speaks very immediately and effortlessly. And I was right about all those things. Those are part of the warm-up. But what I've learned over time, and it looks like a lot of you already realize this, is just how important the mental part of the warm-up is. So let's first actually look at the right side of this. Physical, a lot of these we hit: loosen the muscles and tissues, prevent injury or fatigue. I love this term, find your sound. I did not make that up. I stole it from Maurice Andre, the great trumpet player, who always said it took him about an hour every day just to find his most beautiful resonant tone on the instrument, to find your most efficient tone production, establish a deep, relaxed belly breath, warm up the temperature of the instrument, and then establish your best articulation, rhythm, pulse, and range. So most of those things we mentioned already. Over on the mental side, I can't emphasize enough in this day and age the importance of focusing. I think especially if you're at school and you're running through the hall and you're grabbing your instrument and you sit down, you're not necessarily in a state of mind where you're ready to make your best music and to really accomplish the maximum amount of improvement that you can and music making that you can in the time that you have. So taking even a few minutes just to sort of quiet the mind and focus it on the task at hand is time very well spent. And I always find that the more rushed I am, the more pressed I am for time, the more I need to slow down and focus. Those are the days when you need that time the most. It feels like you don't have the time, but it is time well spent. The second thing under mental, getting yourself in sort of a positive, constructive mindset. I know that a lot of my college students, undergraduate and graduate students here at Vandercook, have a tendency to kind of beat themselves up. If they play them something in a lesson that doesn't go the way they want it to, they're just like, oh man, I suck. And I always say to them, you know, if you were speaking to a student of yours who you cared about and wanted to help, or a friend of yours or a classmate, you wouldn't say, oh man, you suck, right? You wouldn't say that. You would say, okay, here's where you are. Here's where you want to be. How can we get you there? What are the steps that are going to get you closer to where you want to be and how you want to sound? Excuse me. I've been teaching for 12 hours now, so my voice is starting to go. So I think that you deserve to give yourself at least the constructive feedback that you would give to a treasured friend or a student of yours, because you're going to get more feedback from yourself over the years than anyone else. And so maybe check in from time to time and make sure that that feedback that you're giving yourself is comparable to what you would say to someone else that you were trying to help. And if it's more negative, you know, keep that in check. Just notice that. Finding your sound, I put that under both physical and mental, because it does sometimes take a while physically to achieve that rich, resonant tone, but it's also a matter of reminding yourself mentally, oh yeah, that's how I want to approach everything else. That's my sound. Same thing with efficiency of tone production. That is partly physical, but a lot of it is attitude and eliminating any unnecessary tension in the body, and just finding the only place we really need the tension, if we're even going to use that word, is right in the corners of the embouchure. Everything else, our shoulders, our back, our neck, the rest of our face, our eyes, should be as relaxed as possible. Establishing a deep, relaxed belly breath. Sometimes people call this diaphragmatic breathing. I'm not a big fan of like big words, fancy words for their own sake. The diaphragm is this dome-shaped muscle that's in the, I can't see what I'm doing here. It's kind of in the lower part of the abdominal region, below the lungs. And it doesn't actually have any nerve endings. Did you know that? You can't feel your diaphragm. So when we talk about like breathe from the diaphragm, we can't actually feel the diaphragm. So I like to talk about just breathing deeply, or that idea of a belly breath. We'll get more into that in a moment. Reinforcing good habits. I think we've all probably encountered some bad habits in our playing, maybe too much tension in the throat, maybe pressing the mouthpiece too much into our lips, whatever it may be. I'm not a big believer in breaking habits. I feel like if I say to everyone here, don't think of a pink elephant. Well, what did everyone just picture? A pink elephant, right? Our brains aren't very good at negatives. They're not very good at don't. So I always try to reinforce the good habits, the things that we want to do, rather than telling yourself, don't do this, don't tighten up, don't tighten up. In that case, if it's a tight throat, I might tell myself, think of a yawning breath. And I would try to reinforce that rather than trying not to do something. And then the last one, set a small attainable goal for each practice session. I think a lot of us have the big long-term goals, like I want to play like Dizzy Gillespie or whoever your favorite trumpet player is. And that's great. Those long range goals are good. But in order to achieve them, we need these little tiny goals each time we practice so that we're very oriented towards improvement. So maybe there are 4 measures in that one piece that you're working on. And every time you get to those 4 measures, that's where you run into some difficulty. Maybe your goal for one practice session is to slow those 4 measures down and repeat them until you can play them maybe 4 beats per minute faster than at the beginning of the practice session, or 10 beats per minute faster. So little tiny goals, but all those little tiny goals day after day add up to big goals. So let's look at some individual components of the warm-up routine. And if you are an instrumentalist and you have your instrument close by, you can go ahead and do most of these with me. If you're a trumpet player or a brass player, you can do all of them. Some of them may not be as well suited towards woodwind or string instruments, but component number 1, we can all do, and that is breathing exercises. These are particularly important for brass players because obviously the air is the fuel that drives the sound for us. Trying to play a brass instrument without adequate air is kind of like, well, I used to say trying to drive a car without gas in the engine. I guess in these days it would be gas in the engine or charge in your electric battery, either one. It doesn't matter how hard you step on the gas pedal. If there's no fuel, you're not going anywhere. So I want to show you there are many, many good breathing exercises out there that you can do, but I want to show you a really simple one that takes 15 to 30 seconds, and we can all do it together now. So if you have a trumpet nearby, you can actually hold it with 2 hands as a counterweight and find a place where you can stand up and do a forward bend. If you're not in a place where you can do that, you can do this seated as well, but I like to do it in a forward bend. So let's all do this together. I'm going to move my screen down a little bit. So what we're going to do, you can hold your trumpet as a counterweight if you want, you don't have to. And we're just going to go into a gentle forward bend. And I say gentle, you can stay there. If you need to bend your knees a little bit, that's fine. If you need to come up out of the forward bend, this shouldn't be like painful for your hamstrings or your lower back. It's just a comfortable, relaxed forward bend. Fine to bend the knees. Once we're in that position, we're going to breathe in for 4 counts and out for 4. And I want you to specifically try to feel the expansion in your lower back. Try to breathe into your lower back. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. So a very, very full breath. Stay in the forward bend. The next one we're going to do, we're going to take 4 counts in, 4 counts out, and breathe into the side ribs so that you're expanding to the left and to the right. You're expanding outward to the side. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, breathe. And we're going to take one more breath. This one we're going to try and expand in all directions like a balloon. And you might even find if you're in a forward bend that you breathe so fully that you might come up just a little bit out of the forward bend because of the expansion in the abdominal region. So we're expanding in all directions. This is the biggest breath of all. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. Now slowly, slowly stand up because you might be a little bit dizzy just from moving that quantity of oxygen in and out of your body. And what I find is if every day I start my practice, or for those of you who are teachers and band directors, you can start your rehearsal having everyone do this. I find 2 things. One is I've retrained my body what it feels like to take a full capacity breath in a way that's relaxed but vigorous. It's energetic, but it's not tight. And it's deep and it's low. It's a perfect breath for what we want to do. And I find that if I don't remind myself every day physically by doing it, what that feels like, I have a tendency not to breathe quite as deeply. And that's when the bad habits creep in. When the air support is not there, we'll do what we need to do to make it come out, whether that's pressing, regulating the air from the throat or the oral cavity. So it's a great idea to just take 15 seconds. That's all it takes. And do those nice 3 deep breaths that give you an awareness of the expansion in all directions. And it kind of sets you up for success. Did anybody notice anything else that changed from before the 3 deep breaths to after the 3 deep breaths? I'm glancing at the chat here. I don't know about you, but oops, didn't mean to do that. Oh no, how do I go back? Wait. Here we go. I always find that any sort of jitteriness or thoughts that are racing through my head or to-do lists, I'm thinking, oh, I got to remember to call this person later. Taking those 3 deep breaths helps me just kind of let go of all that and just focus on making music. So that's the first component of the warm-up. And I do recommend that even for string players, percussionists, pianists. It still has this effect of sort of relaxing the body and centering the mind, which is a good thing for any instrument. The second component of the warm-up is specific to brass instruments, and that is buzzing on the mouthpiece. Buzzing on the mouthpiece is going to, over time, help us with our oral skills, our ability to match pitch. But it also isolates the variables. And I think it's a little harder than playing the instrument. It's a little less forgiving. So if you can get the sound and the buzz to come out effortlessly and with a full tone on the mouthpiece, then doing it on the instrument is just that much easier. There are many different things you can play on the mouthpiece, but I've given you one example here that I like to use. This is from the Arban's Complete Conservatory Method for trumpet, which there are versions of this for all the brass instruments, low brass as well. If you're in your first, I would say 2 or 3 years of playing an instrument, you can also just play simple songs that you know, the tunes from your band method book or your last concert. You can buzz those on the mouthpiece as well. Nothing wrong with that. But I'm going to show you how I do this exercise from the Arban's book. And since you're on mute, if you have a brass mouthpiece, you can go ahead and buzz this along with me in the appropriate octave. If you're doing trombone, you'd be an octave lower. If you're doing tuba, you'd be 2 octaves lower. Euphonium will be an octave lower. And what I like to do is actually either sit at the piano and give myself a reference or use a drone. The note that I'm going to play on the drone is actually a C, so it's do, but we're going to start on G. And what I'm going to do is play what I like to call a really gooey slur, so like a glissando between the notes. We're not going to try to have a clean slur. Sometimes I've heard this described as piano slurs versus vocal slurs. We want a vocal slur. So I'll show you first. You don't have to play with me this first time. I'll show you. Sorry. So you can hear I'm not going. I'm playing all the frequencies in between. When you run out of air, and you should run out of air quickly, because I don't want you to try to conserve the air. I want you to really just release it freely and fill up the sound. When you need to take a breath, just stop and breathe and rejoin. I'll probably stop and breathe myself at least once, maybe twice. So let's try playing this all together. Here's our drone. And here we go. Ready? And you can hear I'm already out of breath by the end, which is good. We want to use that breath very freely. You can do this exercise in various keys in the Arbenz book. You can also do the previous one, which is number 9. It's right at the beginning of the Arbenz book, but something on the mouthpiece, because if you can get the lips to respond and speak fairly effortlessly on the mouthpiece, then when we put it on the instrument, it's going to be easy peasy. The third warm-up component, and this is true for all instruments, I have it sort of tailored to brass instruments here, is some version of long tones. So these are slower moving exercises. For those of you who are in, say, middle school or in your first few years of playing, or if you teach students who are in their first few years of playing, you can use scales for this. Just nice, slow, slurred scales and half notes work really well as long tones. I am not a big fan of the sort of long tone where you just sit on a note for a very, very long time without any sense of motion or phrasing. I like slightly faster moving long tones so that it still feels like music. It feels like a phrase, but it's slow enough that we can really focus on the quality of our slurs between the notes and the tone of the notes themselves. So one of my favorite first of all, I love scales. I often do scales for my long tones, and they can be just major scales. You can add in minor scales, chromatic scales, modes, octatonic scales. You can go nuts with scales. So you never really finish with those. Those are perfectly fine. But I do also love these other exercises. The person who wrote these exercises, you can see on your screen, Vince Chikowitz, was actually my trumpet teacher when I was a college student, an undergraduate student. So we played these every lesson and every practice session in between. And I really think they're great for warming up. So let me show you what the first one would sound like. And if you're at home and you have a brass instrument, feel free to play along with me. So they're pretty slow, but they're moving enough to sound like a phrase. And I only gave you the first page here, but whatever you do for long tones, it should start in a fairly limited mid-range and then expand outward in both directions. So if I were to turn to the next page of this book, it's going to add more and more notes. We're going to have keep expanding, building up and building down. So eventually, within a fairly short amount of time, you're playing through your full range, whatever that may be. And I would encourage you, band directors, teachers, students, at this point in your warm-up, go ahead and play through your full range. Play beyond the sort of safe window where you can play with your best tone. I would encourage you to actually play as high as you can play and as low as you can play once at this point in the practice. Start in the mid-range, expand up, expand down, and then like hit whatever the top and the bottom of your range is. Because if you never play at the very extremes of your range, then you're not increasing your range. So you don't necessarily want to program music for a concert that has your very highest or very lowest note in it. But as far as your warm-up, it's a good idea to just hit it every day. So that's component 3. I've listed some other things here. If you're familiar with the Stamp book, those are great long tones. Low brass players will probably know the Remington warm-ups. Those are great long tones. And again, once again, scales are a very good option. Let's go on to component 4. So the next component, oh, and by the way, one thing I didn't mention about long tones, if you're an ensemble director or teacher, a chorale works just fine. I would say that playing a chorale is a form of long tones. The next thing I like to introduce, component 4, is some faster moving notes, still slurred, and that's pretty important. We start out on the mouthpiece, we're slurring in a very smooth, glissy, gooey way. Then we're doing some long tones that are slurred, and now we're going to do some faster moving notes that are slurred. The most famous of these for trumpet players would be the Clark Technical Studies that you see on your screen. But again, scales work fine. You can do a slower scale for your long tones, and then a scale in eighth notes or faster moving notes for your fourth component. Let's do number 37 at the top of the page. You can see my Clark Studies book is very marked up. That's what I like to see. I hate it when a student walks into a lesson and their Clark Studies book looks like they've never used it before. I want to see a well-used Clark Studies book. So let's go ahead and try 37. We can play it together, or you can play, if what I play is too fast, you can just play the first note of every set of 4 eighth notes. You can play that along with us, or you can play every other note. So you can play like F, A, G, B flat, A, C, or you can just play a long tone through the whole thing. But we're going to go ahead and repeat. In fact, I'll probably go to minor on the second time. I like to do that. And then I'll probably repeat it a third time. So we're just slurring number 37. And I'm going to try and blow exactly like I'm playing a long tone and just let my fingers move the notes faster. So 1, 2, 1. So you can do this as many times through as you want, whatever tempo. You can see, if you look down the page, some of them are much, much slower than this one is. Depending on the key and the range, they'll all be at different tempos. But just to sort of get the technique going and get the fingers going, that's our fourth component. The fifth component, now we're finally ready to add some articulation. For brass players, this means tonguing. I always start with single tonguing. So why don't we try 37? Again, we can use the exact same exercise, but now we're going to tongue each note staccato. Let's try that all together. We'll just go once through 37. 1, 2, 3. And there are many different ways that I can introduce tonguing. I could do, let's see. There's all different ways we can mix it up. One of my favorite tonguing exercises, you can pick any note within your range. Maybe we'll do G4, so G on the second line. And you can do just a repeated note, articulated. I'll show you, it's going to be a half note, a whole note, then 2 half notes, then 4 quarters, like this. So doing repeated note exercises for articulation tonguing are really great, because then we isolate the variables. We're not trying to find the pitch here. We're just simply working on tonguing. So that's our fifth component. I see we have 34 things in the chat. I wonder if there's anything I need to respond to here. Somebody said double tonguing. I actually like to just start, I did a little bit of multiple tonguing there, but I usually like to just start with single tonguing. I would say as brass players, 95%, probably 99% of the playing we do is single tonguing. So that's really the basic technique that's so important to master. If you're at a level where you've also learned double and triple tonguing, that's something you do want to hit every day, but make sure you're still addressing single tonguing as well, because that's just such a basic component of what we do. Last but not least, would be so-called lip slurs. I don't love the term lip slurs because it makes it sound like we're doing the work with our lips, whereas actually it has a lot to do with our air and the corners of our mouth and even the arch of our tongue inside our mouth. But this is slurring between different notes that have the same fingering. In a perfect world, I would actually not do this as part of the warm-up. I would do it last. So lip slurs, or what I like to call strength builders, that's what I call these exercises. Some people call them flexibility exercises, are sort of like calisthenics for our embouchure, for the muscles that we use to play a brass instrument. So if you can imagine, if you're, say, an athlete, say a basketball player, if you do 100 push-ups before the game, well, that's good. That's going to make you stronger. But if you do 100 push-ups after the game, that's going to be even harder, and you're not going to need to save any strength for the game. So that's kind of how I see these. These are like our push-ups for our embouchure, and I like to do them at the end of the practice session. There are many, many different books and many different warm-ups for band that include some flexibility studies, or strength builders, as I like to call them. So you can choose what works for you. But one of my favorite collections of these is a very old-fashioned book called 27 Groups of Exercises by Earl Irons, which you see there on your screen. Why don't we try just a little bit of group 5? Trumpet players, you can play along with me, but we're going to play everything 1, 2, and 3, and we're not going to push our third valve slide out. We're going to keep it in for this. And so we're just going to play 1, 2, and 3 fingering, not changing at all. And we will do the repeat. So let's try group 5 on 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, 3. And as you get more comfortable, you can take them a little faster. Let's try the next one. So we're 1 and 3, slide in. We're not going to push our slide out like we do for D. We're just going to keep it in. And let's try this one in cut time. You can play along with me at home. This time I'll probably do the repeat twice. So here's the second example for number 5, group 5 on 1 and 3. 1, 2, 1. And you can do as many repeats. You can see already group 6 is getting a little faster, a little more intricate. You can tailor these to all different levels from, I would say, from week 2 of playing a brass instrument through the best professionals in the world. There's some version of these strength builders you can do. If you are a beginning band teacher, starting in about week 2, you can do something like Now, students aren't going to be able to necessarily move right in time or with a great sound, but that's where it begins. That's where flexibility and strength building begins. Let me stop share for just a minute. I have a bonus component. There's 6 components to the warm-up, but I will tell you, every day when I get here early to work and warm up on my trumpet, I like to end by just taking a simple melody of some sort, picking a key, and playing it by ear. I think that's a great thing to do just to develop your ability to match pitch. So it could be as something as simple as Mary Had a Little Lamb. I usually pick like some sort of a jazz tune or a traditional show tune, and just, I don't know, I hadn't even figured out what I'm going to do today, but this one's not seasonally appropriate, but and so on. I'll just pick out a tune like that. I think that's a great thing. It's kind of fun, and it's really good for you as a musician to be able to do that. I have just a couple more slides, and then we're going to open things up. This one's probably not necessary, but I'll share it with you anyway. There you go. This is just a summary of everything that we did, the 6 components of the warm-up. I didn't include the bonus one on here. I think this is good both for individual practice and for ensembles to try and find a balance between a sense of routine, but also keeping things fresh and new every day. I think it is good to have some sense of routine. So if you have no routine at all, then the warm-up just sort of fizzles out and doesn't have any structure to it, and you kind of don't know what am I supposed to be playing here? What am I doing? So it's good to have the routine, but I don't think it's necessarily good to do exactly the same thing every day, day after day after day, because what can happen is, one, you mentally go on autopilot and you're no longer really paying attention to what you're doing because you've done it so many times, and we don't really want to reinforce that kind of playing. We want to be very focused on what we're doing, but also your needs are going to be different every day. If you've had a really tough jazz band rehearsal or performance the night before and you played really hard, guess what? You're going to have to go a lot slower in your warm up and take a little more time to get things the way that you want them. You're going to have to maybe take some more rests. If you're really pressed for time one day, you might need to do all 6 components, but make sure each one of them is just a little bit shorter so you can get through everything that you need to get through. If you're feeling a little swollen, a little puffy, maybe do more mouthpiece buzzing, maybe do a little more long tones on those days. If you're feeling stressed, whether that has to do with music or just life, because life can be stressful, spend a little more time on the deep breathing to get yourself a little bit more relaxed and focused. So you can tailor it to what you need every day. And then the last suggestion I have, I hate it when I hear students talking in the hallway going, oh, I got to practice now, because it shouldn't be a chore. For me, when I get to practice, I get to shut that door, silence my phone, close my devices, and just play music with the best tone I can play and just enjoy the sound of it. So if you can change your mindset so that it feels like a luxury, it feels like a treat, it's like dessert when you get to do your warm up in a nice, relaxed way, it shouldn't really feel like punishment. Does that mean we never have to face frustration or challenges in our practice? Absolutely not. That's a big part of improving as a musician. But those first 10, 15, 20 minutes of warming up, if you can make them feel like a treat, I think that's going to be very sustaining for you over time. And then last but not least, I just want to share with you my contact information. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you'd like to get a little more feedback from me, I love helping students. I love troubleshooting. By all means, feel free to shoot me an email. You can see my email address down there. You can also find it on the Vandercook website. I did put a little link to here also to a video that has a lot of this same material that I went over today, but also gets into some more suggestions for practicing. You have to have the link to access it. It's not a public video, but you have the link here. So feel free to copy that now if you want, or take a photo or screenshot. And other than that, good luck to all of you in your musical journey. I hope something I've said today will help you in your teaching or in your own playing. That pretty much concludes what I have to say, but I'm happy to stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes and answer any questions. Don't feel obliged to stay on the Zoom call if you don't have any questions, unless you just want to listen. But at this point, I would welcome people to just unmute themselves if they have questions. And thank you so much. I hope our musical paths will cross again. And I hope to see you all and hear you play in the future. And thank you so much for coming.